They say blood is thicker than water. They say that family is the only thing you can count on when the rest of the world turns its back on you. For 32 years of my life, I believed that. I lived by it. I made sacrifices for my parents and my younger brother, Leo, that no one should ever have to make. But looking back, I realized that the people who are supposed to protect you from the wolves are sometimes the very ones leading you into the trap. My name is Arthur. And a few months ago, I discovered that the people who gave me life had traded my entire future away for a lie. It all started with my grandfather, Thomas. He was a quiet, hard-working man who built a beautiful piece of land up in the northern hills. It wasn't just property, it was a sanctuary. He built the main house with his own 2 hands, log by log, stone by stone. When I was a boy, whenever life became too loud or too difficult, my grandfather would take me out to the edge of that property, right where the forest met the valley. He would look out over the trees and tell me, "Arthur, this world will try to take a lot of things from you. But hard work and honest land can never be stolen. When I am gone, this place is yours. Promise me you will take care of it." I promised him. I held his wrinkled, calloused hand, and I promised him. When he passed away 5 years ago, he kept his word. In his final will, he left the entire estate, the house, the land, and the small family business attached to it, strictly to me. But there was a catch. Because of a complicated tax loop and an old agreement made decades ago, the deed had to be processed through a family trust managed by my parents, Richard and Eleanor. Now you have to understand my parents. To the outside world, Richard and Eleanor were pillars of the community. My father was a retired local official, always wearing a neat suit, always speaking with a calm, authoritative voice. My mother was an elegant woman who ran charity events and smiled warmly at everyone she met. They looked like the perfect, supportive parents. But behind closed doors, things were very different. There was a golden child in our family, and it wasn't me. It was my younger brother Leo. Leo was charming. He was handsome, quick-witted, and incredibly lazy. While I spent my 20s working 12-hour shifts to help pay off the family debts and maintain my grandfather's property, Leo was bouncing from one failed business venture to another. He wanted the lifestyle of a millionaire businessman without doing a single day of actual work. And every time Leo crashed and burned, every time a creditor called or a landlord threatened to evict him, my parents were there to catch him. They used their own savings, they took out loans, and eventually, they started looking at what wasn't theirs to give. I remember a dinner we had about a year ago. We were sitting in my parents' pristine dining room. The air was thick with tension. Leo had just lost another major investment, this time in a ridiculous cryptocurrency scheme that had wiped out $60,000 of borrowed money. My father was rubbing his temples, staring down at his plate. My mother was quietly wiping away tears. "Arthur," my mother said softly, her voice trembling with that specific, manipulative sadness she used so well. "Your brother is in a very dark place. The people he borrowed money from, they are threatening to take his car. They might even involve the authorities. He needs help. Real help." I set my fork down. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. "Mom, I've given Leo $15,000 over the last 3 years. I haven't seen a single dime of it back. I am trying to renovate grandfather's house so I can finally move in. I don't have any more cash to give." My father looked up, his eyes cold and sharp. "Arthur, he is your brother. Family means making sacrifices. If Leo fails, the family name fails. We have to think about our legacy." "My legacy is the promise I made to grandfather," I replied firmly. "I am keeping the land. I am building my life there." My parents exchanged a brief, silent look. It was a look I didn't think much of at the time, but now, it haunts me. It was the look of 2 people who had already made a decision that would alter the course of my life forever. They smiled, changed the subject, and acted as if everything was fine. For the next several months, things actually seemed to improve. Leo stopped asking for money. My parents became unusually warm and supportive, constantly asking how the renovations on grandfather's house were going. They told me to take my time, that the trust paperwork was being finalized by their lawyer, and that I shouldn't worry about a thing. I felt a profound sense of relief. I thought, finally, they see me, they respect my boundaries. I spent every weekend at the property. I repaired the roof, I sanded the old oak floors, and I planted fresh trees along the valley edge, just like my grandfather wanted. I invested my entire life savings, over $80,000 of my hard-earned money, into restoring that estate. I thought I was building my forever home. I didn't know that I was actually building a luxury product for my parents to sell behind my back. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the illusion completely shattered. I was at my office desk when I received a notification on my phone. It was an automated alert from a local property registry website. A few months prior, I had set up an online alert for grandfather's estate address, just to keep track of any zoning changes or local utility updates in the area. The notification was simple. It said, "Status change, pending sale/transfer of title." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Pending sale? That had to be a technical error. It had to be a glitch in the county system. The property belonged to me. It was in my grandfather's will. It was held in the family trust until the final deed transfer was stamped next month. There was no way it could be for sale. I immediately called my father. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, before going straight to voicemail. I called my mother. It rang all the way through, but she didn't answer. A cold wave of anxiety washed over me. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my jacket, walked out of my office, and got into my car. I drove straight to the county records office in the center of town. The rain was pouring down, tapping aggressively against my windshield, matching the frantic beating of my heart. When I arrived, I walked up to the clerk's desk. I gave them the property identification number and my grandfather's name. "I need to check the current status of this deed," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I received an alert that it's being sold." The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, typed into her computer for a few moments. She frowned, adjusted her glasses, and leaned closer to the monitor. "Are you Arthur?" "Yes," I said. "Well, Arthur, according to the records here, a purchase agreement was signed 4 days ago. The property is currently in escrow. The closing date is set for the end of this month." The room felt like it was spinning. The air left my lungs completely. Who signed the agreement? Who is selling it? The clerk turned her monitor slightly toward me and pointed to the digital signatures at the bottom of the document. There, in clear, bold letters, were the names of the trustees, Richard Vance and Eleanor Vance. And next to their names was the buyer. It wasn't a local family. It was a major commercial development corporation called Crestview Holdings. They didn't buy historic homes to preserve them. They bought land to clear-cut the trees, tear down the buildings, and build dense, profitable luxury condominiums. "This is impossible," I whispered, gripping the edge of the counter to keep my balance. "My grandfather left that land to me. I have the copy of the will. My parents are just the temporary trustees. They don't have the legal right to sell it without my consent." The clerk looked at me with deep sympathy. "I'm so sorry, dear. But according to the specific wording of the trust document filed by your parents' attorney 3 years ago, the trustees were granted full executive power to liquidate the assets of the estate if they deemed it necessary for the financial stability of the beneficiaries. Since your brother Leo is listed as a co-beneficiary of the overall trust, they used that clause to bypass your individual inheritance. They didn't just sell the land. They had planned this years ago. They had structured the trust like a trap, waiting for the perfect moment to spring it." I walked out of the records office into the freezing rain, completely numb. My own parents had stolen my grandfather's legacy. They had stolen my $80,000 of renovations. They had stolen my future. And they did it all in secret, smiling at me over dinner, asking how the house was coming along, knowing all the while that a bulldozer was waiting to tear it down. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The sadness inside me was slowly being replaced by something else. A dark, cold, focused heat. Anger like I had never felt before in my life. I didn't call them again. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. Instead, I drove directly to my parents' house. When I let myself in using my spare key, I found the 3 of them, my mother, my father, and Leo, sitting around the living room. They were laughing. There was a bottle of expensive champagne open on the coffee table. Leo was holding a brochure for a brand new luxury sports car, a massive grin on his face. When they saw me standing in the doorway, drenched in rain, the laughter instantly died. My mother gasped, dropping her glass onto the carpet. My father stood up quickly, his face turning pale before he quickly forced a stern, angry expression onto his features. "Arthur," my father said, his voice booming. "What is the meaning of this? You don't just burst into our home without knocking." I walked slowly into the center of the room. I looked at the champagne. I looked at Leo's brochure. "How much did you sell it for?" I asked. My voice was incredibly quiet, incredibly calm, but it cut through the room like a knife. The three of them went completely silent. Leo looked down at the floor, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. My mother began to wring her hands together. "Arthur, please let us explain," my mother pleaded, taking a step toward me. "We were going to tell you this weekend. We truly were." "Explain what?" I asked, looking directly at my father. "Explain how you stole the land grandfather promised me? Explain how you watched me spend every dollar of my savings fixing up that house, knowing you were selling it to a developer who was going to destroy it? Explain how you ruined my life to buy Leo a new toy." My father stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. The mask of the perfect, pillar of the community parent was completely gone. Now he just looked desperate and cruel. "Watch your tone, Arthur," he snapped. "We did what we had to do. Your brother was facing ruin. He owed people money, dangerous people. The sale of that land cleared his debts and secured this family's safety. You have a good job. You can buy another house. Leo needed this. Leo needed to grow up," I said through clenched teeth. "And you had no right. We had every legal right." My father shouted, slamming his hand down on the table. "The trust belongs to us until it is dissolved. We signed the papers. The deal is done. The money is moving. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. So you can either accept it, let us help you find a small apartment, or you can leave this family forever." I looked at my mother. She looked away. I looked at Leo, who gave a pathetic, smug little shrug. They thought they had won. They thought because they had the legal paperwork, because they were the brilliant, untouchable Richard and Eleanor Vance, I would just bow my head, take the loss, and suffer in silence to protect their reputation. I looked my father dead in the eye. "You're right," I said softly. "The deal is done. But you forgot one thing." "And what is that?" My father sneered. "You forgot who kept the records for grandfather's business," I said. I turned around, walked out the front door, and closed it quietly behind me. As I walked back to my car through the rain, the anger completely crystallized into a plan. They thought they had used the law to defeat me, but they didn't realize that in their haste to save Leo, they had left a massive, hidden trail of destruction behind them. A secret so dark that if the public ever found out, it wouldn't just ruin their finances. It would destroy their names forever. And I was about to show the whole world exactly who they were. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the darkness of my small apartment, the glowing screen of my laptop illuminating the walls. My father's words kept echoing in my mind. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. He believed his status, his legal loopholes, and his polished reputation made him bulletproof. He thought I was just a compliant son who would swallow his grief and move on. But he had overlooked a critical detail. For the past 7 years, I wasn't just working a day job. I was also acting as the volunteer accountant and archivist for my grandfather's old timber and land management business. When grandfather passed, my parents took control of the trust, but they found the day-to-day paperwork incredibly boring. They handed me 3 large, dusty plastic crates filled with decades of financial ledgers, tax filings, and bank statements, telling me to clean it up. I had kept those crates stacked neatly in my spare closet. I never had a reason to look at them with suspicion before. I had trusted them. I stood up, walked to the closet, and dragged the heavy crates into the center of my living room. I popped the plastic lids off. The musty scent of old paper and ink filled the room. I began to organize the documents by year, tracing the flow of money from my grandfather's estate into the family trust managed by Richard and Eleanor. For the first few hours, everything looked normal. Regular maintenance costs, property taxes, local utility bills. But then I reached the files from 4 years ago, right around the time my brother Leo started his 3rd failed business venture, a high-end restaurant that went bankrupt within 6 months. I noticed a series of large, recurring withdrawals from the trust account. They weren't marked for property upkeep. They were categorized as charitable donations to the Vance Community Foundation. The Vance Community Foundation was my mother's pride and joy. It was a registered nonprofit organization that supposedly raised money to build playgrounds and fund art programs for underprivileged children in our town. Because of her work with the foundation, my mother was constantly featured in the local newspaper. She was viewed as a saint. I pulled up the public tax filings for my mother's foundation on my computer and compared them directly to the private trust bank statements. That's when the first massive red flag appeared. According to the trust statements, a total of $180,000 had been transferred from my grandfather's estate to the charity over a 2-year period. But when I looked at the charity's public financial declarations, that money didn't exist. There was no record of a $180,000 injection. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. Where did the money go? I began digging deeper into the charity's detailed expense reports. I found a list of independent contractors hired by the charity for consulting services. There was only one name listed under the consulting contracts. LV Enterprises.
LV Enterprises.
Leo Vance. My parents hadn't just been giving Leo their own savings. They had been taking money out of my grandfather's estate, funneling it into my mother's charity to get a massive tax deduction, and then paying that exact same money out to Leo's shell company as a consulting fee to clear his personal debts. It was a textbook money laundering scheme operating right under the nose of the local community. But it got worse. As I looked closer at the dates, I realized that the latest contracts signed with Crestview Holdings, the developers buying my inheritance, included an upfront cash advance of $250,000 to the trustees. My parents had already received that cash advance, and according to the digital ledger copies I found in the trust portal, they had used that exact money to pay off an aggressive out-of-state creditor who had been threatening to sue Leo for fraud. They had used my grandfather's land as collateral to save Leo from going to prison. By 5 o'clock in the morning, my living room floor was covered in highlighted documents, bank statements, and printed tax laws. I had everything I needed. My parents weren't just greedy, they were criminally liable. If these documents were handed to the state tax authority and the local press, the Vance family legacy would be utterly vaporized. My mother's charity would be shut down, my father's political legacy would turn to ash, and Leo would likely end up behind bars. I looked out the window as the sun began to rise over the city. I felt a profound sense of sadness. They were my family. But then I looked at a photograph of my grandfather sitting on my desk, smiling in front of the house he built with his own hands. I remembered the heavy machinery that was scheduled to tear it down at the end of the month. They hadn't shown me any mercy. They hadn't thought about my survival or my future. They had thrown me to the wolves to protect a spoiled, reckless liar. The time for crying was over. It was time to build a trap. The key to a perfect revenge is timing. If I moved too quickly, if I just started shouting accusations or posted the files online immediately, my father's powerful friends and high-priced lawyers would find a way to spin the narrative. They would claim it was an accounting error. They would label me as a bitter, jealous son trying to smear his family because he didn't get his way. I needed the trap to be completely inescapable. I needed them to walk into it willingly, with total confidence, right up until the moment it snapped shut. The next morning, I called a man named Marcus Vance. Marcus was my father's older brother, my uncle. He was a deeply honest, no-nonsense retired attorney who had been estranged from my father for nearly a decade. Marcus had always refused to participate in my parents' high society galas, calling them a circus of phonies. Because of his legal background and his known integrity, Marcus was still highly respected by the local courthouse and city council. I drove out to Marcus's quiet home in the suburbs. We sat on his porch, and I laid out the entire paper trail across his coffee table. Marcus adjusted his glasses, reading through the bank transfers and the shell company contracts. The further he read, the darker his expression became. He let out a long, slow sigh and took off his glasses. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice grave. "I knew your father was a proud man, and I knew he coddled Leo. But this is systemic fraud. They have used a non-profit charity to hide the liquidation of your grandfather's assets. If this goes to court, They are in severe jeopardy. I don't want to just file a lawsuit that takes 3 years to resolve, Uncle Marcus, I said openly. By then the developers will have already paved over the land. The house will be gone. I need to stop the sale of the property immediately. I need them to sign the deed over to me, permanently. Marcus leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together. A sharp, knowing glint appeared in his eyes. The closing date with Crestview Holdings is next Friday at the regional bank headquarters, correct? Yes, I nodded. At 2 in the afternoon. Good, Marcus said, a cold smile forming on his lips. Your father has invited all the local city council members and a local news reporter to the bank lobby for a small press conference right after the signing. He wants to showcase the historic development partnership to boost his social standing. He is walking onto a stage, Arthur. And we are going to write the script for the finale. Marcus spent the next 2 hours mapping out the legal framework. He drafted a formal, binding settlement agreement. This document stated that in exchange for total confidentiality regarding all past financial transactions, Richard and Eleanor Vance would dissolve the family trust, completely forfeit their roles as trustees, and transfer 100% ownership of the property and all remaining estate assets to me. Now, Marcus warned, looking me dead in the eye, you cannot show them this until the absolute last second. If you warn them, they will cancel the public event, hide their assets, and go into defensive mode. You must let them believe they have won completely right until the pen touches the paper. I understand, I replied. To make sure they didn't suspect anything, I sent a text message to my mother later that afternoon. I kept the tone defeated and weary. I wrote that I was tired of fighting, that I was angry the other night but realized she was just trying to save Leo, and that I accepted the land was being sold and wouldn't stand in their way anymore. Within 2 minutes she replied, telling me she knew I would understand, that I had a big heart, and thanking me for putting family first. I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of nausea. They loved my compliance and my silence. They didn't love me. Over the next few days, I watched from a distance as my parents prepared for their grand celebration. My father posted announcements on his social media about the upcoming project, bragging about the luxury living it would bring. My mother bought a stunning new designer dress. Leo was seen around town test driving sports cars, telling people he was about to come into a massive windfall. They were flying high, believing they had outsmarted me and secured their lifestyle. They had no idea that every single step they took toward that bank headquarters was bringing them closer to their own public destruction. Friday arrived. The weather was bright and clear, a stark contrast to the rainy afternoon when I had discovered their betrayal. At 1:30 p.m., I walked into the grand marble-floored lobby of the First Regional Bank downtown. The room was bustling with activity. In the center of the lobby, a large banner had been set up featuring an architectural drawing of the Crestview luxury condominiums. A local news camera crew was setting up their tripod, and several prominent members of the city council were standing around holding glasses of sparkling water, chatting amiably. There, in the center of the crowd, stood my parents and Leo. My father was radiant, shaking hands with a local politician. My mother was smiling warmly, gesturing toward the banner. Leo was standing slightly behind them, looking smugly at his phone. When I entered, my mother spotted me. Her eyes widened slightly, and she quickly whispered something to my father. They both excused themselves from the politicians and walked over to me, their expressions a mix of patronizing warmth and cautious authority. Arthur, my father said in a low, hushed voice, offering a firm handshake that I didn't take. I'm glad you're here to witness this. It shows real maturity. Just remember to keep a smile on your face when the cameras turn on. We are a united front. I'm just here to see the conclusion of the deal, Father, I said, my voice completely flat. Good lad, he whispered, patting my shoulder. We're going up to the private executive boardroom on the 4th floor, now to sign the final paperwork with the Crestview executives. The press conference will follow down here right after. Why don't you join us upstairs? I'd love to, I said. We walked to the elevators. Leo slid in next to me, leaning in close so our parents couldn't hear. No hard feelings, big bro, he whispered with a pathetic grin. Once the check clears, Maybe I'll buy you a nice dinner to make up for the house. I looked at him, feeling no anger anymore, only a profound sense of pity. Enjoy the moment, Leo, I replied softly. The elevator doors opened onto the 4th floor. The executive boardroom was magnificent, dominated by a massive, polished mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Sitting at the far end of the table were 3 corporate executives from Crestview Holdings, flanked by their corporate legal counsel. Stacked in the center of the table were thick piles of legal contracts, ready for signatures. As we walked in, a man stepped out from the corner of the room. It was Uncle Marcus, dressed in his finest legal suit, holding a sleek black briefcase. My father froze in his tracks. His smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of deep anger and confusion. Marcus? What on earth are you doing here? We haven't spoken in years. Who invited you? I invited him, I said, walking past my father and taking a seat at the mahogany table. Uncle Marcus walked over and stood directly behind my chair, placing his briefcase on the table with a loud, authoritative click. The lead Crestview executive looked up, confused. Mr. Vance, is there a problem? Who is this gentleman? This is no one, my father said quickly, his voice rising in panic as he tried to maintain his composure in front of the billionaires. Marcus, whatever family grievance you have, this is a highly important commercial transaction. Leave immediately, or I will have security remove you. Uncle Marcus didn't flinch. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick, bound folder of documents, and slid it directly down the center of the table. It stopped right in front of the lead Crestview executive. Gentlemen, Uncle Marcus said, his voice echoing with courtroom authority. Before you sign that contract and wire $2 million to the Vance Family Trust, I highly advise you to look at those files. My client, Arthur Vance, is the true rightful heir to the property in question. Furthermore, those documents contain verified bank records proving that the current trustees, Richard and Eleanor Vance, are currently under investigation for systemic financial fraud, tax evasion, and utilizing a registered nonprofit charity to illegally launder estate assets. The boardroom went dead silent. The air pressure seemed to drop to zero. The Crestview executive stared at the folder. The lead executive slowly opened it, his eyes scanning the highlighted bank transfers, the charity filings, and the contracts with Leo Shell Company. His face went completely pale. He looked up at his corporate lawyer, who immediately pulled the folder toward himself, reviewing the pages with intense, rapid scrutiny. What is the meaning of this? My father roared, his face turning an angry, violent shade of red. He stormed toward me, pointing a trembling finger at my face. Arthur, you miserable, ungrateful snake. You are fabricating lies to ruin this family. There is no fraud. Marcus, you are a washed-up old fool. Richard, sit down, the corporate lawyer for Crestview interrupted. His voice was cold, sharp, and entirely detached. He closed the folder with a heavy thud. He looked at his executive team and gave a slight, definitive shake of his head. The lead executive closed his pen. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Mr. Vance, Crestview Holdings is a publicly traded corporation. We have a zero-tolerance policy for legal instability, let alone active financial fraud and charity manipulation. This deal is officially canceled. Our legal team will be filing an immediate rescission notice to pull our funds out of escrow. No. Wait. My mother cried out, her voice cracking with sheer terror. She reached out toward the executives. Please, it's just a family misunderstanding. We can fix it. We can explain everything. We are done here, the executive said coldly. The 3 Crestview representatives gathered their briefcases, turned on their heels, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the heavy glass doors swinging slowly in their wake. The silence that followed was deafening. My father sank into a leather chair, looking as though he had aged 20 years in a matter of seconds. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. My mother collapsed against the wall, weeping silently into her hands, realizing that her pristine social standing, her charity, and her designer lifestyle were crumbling into dust. Leo looked completely paralyzed, staring at the floor, knowing that without that corporate money, his dangerous creditors would be coming for him with full legal force by tomorrow morning. My father slowly looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of intense hatred and desperate begging. "You ruined us," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You took everything from us. Your own parents. Your own brother." "Why?" I stood up from the table. I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the mahogany wood, looking directly into his hollow eyes. "I didn't ruin you, Father," I said, my voice completely steady. "Your own greed did. You told me there was nothing I could do. You told me to accept it or leave the family. Well, now it's my turn to give you a choice." Uncle Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out the second, smaller document he had drafted. The formal settlement and deed transfer agreement. He placed it directly in front of my father, sliding a heavy black pen next to it. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This is your survival," Uncle Marcus said firmly. "This document permanently dissolves the Vance family trust. It completely strips you and Eleanor of any legal authority over your father's estate. It transfers the total, unconditional ownership of the land, the house, and all connected assets directly to Arthur." My father stared at the paper. "And if we refuse?" "If you refuse," I said, leaning in closer, "Uncle Marcus and I walk down those stairs right now. We walk right up to the local news crew waiting in your press conference lobby, and we hand them a copy of the fraud files. By tonight, every news channel in the state will be broadcasting your money laundering scheme. By Monday morning, the state tax authority will be auditing your charity, and Leo will be facing a grand jury." Leo let out a whimper from the corner of the room. "Dad, please. Just sign it. Please. If they call the police, I'm going to jail." My mother looked up, her face tear-stained and ruined. "Richard. We have no choice. Sign it." My father looked at the pen. His chest heaved with a heavy, defeated sigh. The great, powerful, untouchable Richard Vance had been completely cornered. He realized that the narrative he had built over 30 years, the illusion of the perfect, high-society family, was completely dependent on the mercy of the son he had tried to destroy. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly that his signature was jagged and uneven, but he signed his name on the line. He pushed the paper over to my mother. She signed hers as well. Uncle Marcus picked up the document, checked the signatures, and stamped it with his official notary seal. He looked at me and gave a brief, proud nod. "It's official," Arthur Marcus said. "The land is yours. No one can ever touch it again." I took the document from his hands. I looked down at my parents and my brother. They looked like ghosts sitting in a palace of wealth they no longer controlled. "Now," I said, my voice cold and resolute, "get out of my sight. Don't call me. Don't come to the property. As far as I am concerned, the family name you were so desperate to protect dies today." They didn't say a word. They stood up slowly, keeping their heads down, and walked out of the boardroom. I stood by the high glass windows and watched them emerge from the front doors of the bank a few minutes later. Down in the lobby, the politicians and the news crew were looking around confused, wondering why the big signing had been abruptly canceled. My parents didn't look at any of them. They scurried through the crowd, shielding their faces, running toward their car like thieves in the afternoon light. The press conference they had built to celebrate their triumph had become the backdrop of their total humiliation. 2 weeks later, I stood on the edge of my grandfather's property. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth from the valley below. The historic log house stood tall behind me, its newly renovated roof gleaming under the afternoon sun. The heavy construction vehicles from Crestview Holdings never arrived. The trees were still standing. The valley was completely quiet, peaceful, and safe. I walked over to the small garden bed near the porch and knelt down, running my hand through the rich, dark soil. I had spent my entire life believing that loyalty to family meant blind obedience. I had believed that making sacrifices for the people who shared my blood was a moral requirement, even when those people were actively draining my spirit and exploiting my hard work. But this journey had taught me a bitter, Essential truth. Blood relation does not guarantee love. A title like parent or brother does not give someone the right to steal your future, exploit your kindness, or sacrifice your well-being on the altar of their own greed. True family are the people who respect your boundaries, honor their promises, and build you up instead of tearing you down. My parents and Leo survived the ordeal, but their lives were permanently altered. Without the corporate payout, they had to sell their grand luxury home and move into a small, rented townhouse outside the city limits. My mother quietly resigned from her charity foundation, citing health reasons, though everyone in town noticed the sudden, icy distance from her former high society friends. Leo had to take a regular, entry-level job to slowly pay off his creditors, finally learning the value of an honest dollar the hard way. They were left with their lives, but their illusions were entirely gone. I sat down on the front porch steps of my grandfather's house, looking out over the beautiful northern hills. For the first time in my 32 years, I felt completely free. The weight of their manipulation had been lifted from my shoulders. I had kept my promise to grandfather. I had protected the land. And in doing so, I had finally learned how to protect myself. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the valley, I knew that the house built by honest hands would stand for generations to come. Not as a monument to wealth or social status, but as a sanctuary of truth, justice, and real integrity.